public meeting. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed subsequently. Everyone participating in the meeting will be accessing it either from the Council Chamber at Civic Offices, Angel Street, Bridgend, or from remote locations. Some of you may already be aware that I have a condition called adult onset epilepsy, which occasionally results in me experiencing short absences or mild seizures. On the rare occasions that this may happen in a meeting, you should not be alarmed, and should I as chair experience one of these absences or have any other technical ICT difficulties during the meeting, it has been agreed that Councillor Freya Bledsoe will step in temporarily as chair, and in her absence, then Councillor Penhale Thomas will step in during the meeting. Please can everyone ensure that mobile phones are switched off or to silent mode. Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda, and I will ask the officer to present a brief summary of the key points. For the record, the agenda can be viewed on the Council's website. Officers and members are reminded to refer to the page numbers contained in the public version of the agenda report pack. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking may switch their cameras on at that point, but I would ask that, with the exception of myself as chairperson, at all other times you keep your cameras and microphones switched off, as this will help to minimize any background noise and interference. Whether attending in the chamber or remotely, if any members and officers wish to raise a point or question, they should click the raise hand icon at the top right-hand side of the Microsoft Teams window, and I will come to you in the order I receive requests. If you are in the chamber, please switch on the microphone on your desk and speak directly into the mic to allow those who are remote to hear you clearly. Please lower your hand once you have finished speaking. The instant messaging chat button has been disabled for this meeting. Please do not use your microphone until I invite you to do so. Officers from Scrutiny will be supporting the meeting and will be monitoring the use of microphones throughout its duration, and where necessary, will mute those not being used. I will ask officers to introduce themselves when I invite them to speak during the course of the meeting. They too should ensure microphones and cameras are switched off when not in use. I will now proceed to the agenda for the meeting. Item 1, apologies for absence. I will now ask the Scrutiny Officer to announce the apologies for absence received. Lucy, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we've received apologies for absence from the Mayor, Councillor Martin Jones, due to Mayor duties, and also Councillor Hal Williams, Cabinet Member for Resources, will be joining the meeting slightly later.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Are there any other apologies for absence? I can see no members indicating, so I will now move to item 2, declarations of interest. If any member has an interest to declare in any matter on the agenda, please click on the raise hand icon and I will come to you in turn. I can see no member indicating, so I now move to item 3 on the agenda, and that's the medium-term financial strategy 2023-24 to 2026-27. I will now ask the Chief Officer of Finance, Performance and Change, Caris Lord, to introduce the report. Caris, thank you. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you very much, Chair. Just to confirm and for the recording, I'm Caris Lord. I'm the Chief Officer for Finance, Performance and Change. This is a very detailed report. I appreciate that, Chair. What I intend to do is just go through the main points, as there's a lot of text in this report, but hopefully it's way of summary. The purpose of this report is to present to you the draft medium-term financial strategy for the period 2023-2024 through to 2026-27. And it does include a financial forecast for you for that period, together with a more detailed draft revenue budget for the coming financial year. So members have received monitoring reports throughout this year, which have outlined the financial pressures during the current year. And these have been brought about by residual cost pressures and loss of income from the pandemic, additional inflationary pressures, and the significant impact of the cost of living crisis on both pay and prices, in particular with regards to fuel and energy prices. So this context has made budget planning for the coming year that much more difficult and more challenging than maybe usually it is. Also, in addition to that, the council is still looking to address issues with regards to homelessness and to strengthen and support social care, which is experiencing increased demand and costs, as well as more complex cases both in adults and children's services. So we outlined for you in the report that current financial situation and also the principles that underpin the development of this draft budget. In particular, that the council is seeking to protect the most vulnerable people in our community, and also that the council will seek to limit growth wherever possible. I think I would just remind members as well that since 2010, this council has found over £73 million worth of savings on its revenue budget, and that obviously impacts as well on our planning going forward. Within section 4 of the report this morning, we detail for you particular issues for each service area, and just very quickly, with regard to education, the plan is to spend £137 million on services delivered by the Education and Family Support Service. And also just to point out that in addition to the £110 million proposed to be delegated to schools in this budget, money is also available in the capital programme to build and refurbish schools as part of the Band B programme under the 21st Century School Modernisation Programme. With regards to the schools budget, it is proposed to fully fund the pay and price increases that each school will have to meet during the following next year. Under these proposals today, schools will be required to find budget reductions of 2% under these proposals. These reductions do significantly outweigh the increases that will be paid for pay and price inflation, and that is detailed in Table 6 of today's report. In relation to social care and wellbeing, the proposed budget is a £92.7 million revenue spend on social care and wellbeing, and it's proposed to fund considerable pressures in this service due to the increased demand and complexity of the care required. And with to meet public expectations for the highly visible and tangible services within that overall, which the community has, but to contain it within the overall council budget. The report also outlines for you what the council will do going forward to support the local economy, and also the work done by regulatory and corporate services together with other council-wide services. So you'll see from the report that the Welsh Government announced the provisional settlement on the 14th of December. However, the final settlement will not be announced until the end of February, and therefore this report and the draft budget proposed are done on the basis of this provisional settlement. The headline figure across Wales was an increase of 7.9% in Welsh Government funding for next year, and for Bridgend, that was a report of 7.7% increase in our Welsh Government funding. Information on specific grants is available at an all Wales level, but at the current time, we don't have that broken down to an individual authority level. Within the settlement as well, indicative increase in its budget allocation for the year 24-25, which is at 3.1% across Wales. We don't have a particular figure for Bridgend within that allocation. Given the scale of the financial challenges going forward, within our financial modelling, an assumed increase in council tax for the following years of 4.5% have been included. That's for the years 24-25 and 25-26. Obviously, as usual, Chair, we will review these figures as we go through the year. That has brought about, as you will see at paragraph 4.11.4, the total savings that the council may be required to make over this 3-year period. So the draft revenue budget for the next year is shown in Table 6, as I've already mentioned. And I would suggest the key things brought to your attention. It's proposed to fund cost pressures of £10.7 million, and these are detailed for you at Appendix A this morning. I would say that the council actually had cost pressures of nearer £20 million, but the budget is proposing funding 10.5 of that. And these costs will cover things associated with supporting and protecting our most vulnerable residents, especially children, to deal with the increased demands we have on our homelessness budget, to support increases in the older persons population, which is placing additional pressures on adult services, and also some of the increased costs of commissioned services in the social care sector following the increases in the real living wage. There are also proposals within this proposed budget around budget reductions of £3.2 million, and these are detailed for you at Appendix B to the report. Within the report also is an outline of the current position with regards to our capital budget. As part of the draft settlement, Bridgend has been awarded £8.8 million to support the funding for next year. And the latest capital programme is being considered this afternoon by Council, and any further changes will be included in the final MTFS to be approved in Council in February. Due to the limited capital resources available, no bids have been requested this year. However, it is accepted that there are a number of capital pressures that will need to be financed going forward, and these will be updated when the final budget proposals are presented to Cabinet and to Council in February and March. So this report does outline the proposed budget for the coming year, and is predicated on an increase of 6% in our council tax. It also outlines for you that these proposals are now subject to consultation with all of the scrutiny committees, this being the first meeting, and these consultations will be completed by this time next week. The public consultation is also ongoing and is due to end later this week, and the findings from both of these exercises will be considered when drafting the final budget for the coming year. So, Chair, I would take you to the recommendations in section 9 of this report, which requests committee consider the information contained in the report and attached appendices, and also determines whether to make any comments or recommendations for consolidation and inclusion in the report to Cabinet on the draft MTFS, including the proposed budget pressures and budget reduction proposals within the remit of this scrutiny committee as part of the budget consultation process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Caris, for that useful overview of the forthcoming budget proposal. I'd just like to extend my thanks to you, Caris, Deb, Exton, and your whole team for all of the work which you put in preparing the budget and the MTFS. It's very much appreciated. I've agreed with scrutiny officers to take the report which has been presented before us today logically by page number and by section. So we will now move, members, to section 3, which is the corporate plan policy context and background, which are on pages 3 to 4 of your public paper pack. So please raise your hand if you have any questions to ask on the policy context. I can't see any members indicating, so I'll ask a question, if I may, Caris, and other officers and cabinet members in the meeting. At 3.2, you say that the draft MTFS has been significantly guided by the proposed new objectives contained within the corporate plan. This is now yet to be approved or finalised by full council. So could you outline what these proposed new objectives within the corporate plan are and how they've been aligned with the MTFS?
As you rightly say, Chair, the corporate plan is up for a review at the moment. We've come to the end of the current corporate plan, so it's obviously a more significant update than we would usually do on our annual work. I mean, we're still looking at the objectives and the key priorities for the plan, but they do remain very much in line with the principles that we've outlined in this report with regards to supporting vulnerable people in our society, also to support the economy as a whole within Bridgend as it benefits all residents and all services that we can provide. So those are some of the key ones. We're obviously keeping an eye on the corporate plan as it develops, and we'll make sure that whatever is in our final MTFS for next year truly reflects those objectives.
Thanks very much for that clarification, Caris. Unless any other members want to intervene on the policy context, we'll now move to section 4, and that's the current situation and proposals. We'll take it in order, but these are pages 4 to 35 in your packs. We'll start with the budget narrative, pages 4 to 5. Are there any questions on 4.1.1? I can't see any member indicating, so I'll ask a question if I may, Caris, and that is, from my perspective, the principles which underpin the development of the budget and MTFS are on the whole sound. However, it does say at point 3, all budgets across the council have been reviewed to identify savings for the coming year. I really do appreciate the engagement which you have had with me over the course of this budget setting process. And I think going forward, when the Budget Responsibility and Evaluation Panel meets in forthcoming financial years, we'll be in a much better position to have more detail on the exact workings out which result in the final proposals which are presented before us. But I think it would be useful in future if we would, in providing some value to the Cabinet in considering its proposals going forward, for us to be able to see the workings out as well as the final answer which you're proposing. So can you outline how, just briefly, because obviously we'll go into this in a lot later on in the session, and also through other scrutiny committee sessions which are occurring over the next week. But can you just give some indication of why you've come to the conclusions you have, and in future commit to providing the committee with all different options which Cabinet have considered going forward? First of all, I'll bring in the Deputy Leader who's indicated that she'd like to respond, and then perhaps, Caris, you may want to intervene as well. Deputy Leader, Councillor Jane Gebby.
Thank you very much, Chair. I actually was going to comment on 4.1.1, where you look at our corporate priorities. And I think one of the things I would draw members' attention to is these are not budget savings. These are cuts to services. That's the first comment that I would make. I think we're just trying to put it in a polite manner for public consumption. And the other thing I would say is back office services. When you consider what back office services we have in the council, when you look at our legal department, our HR department, these are severely under strain. And as members will be aware, because we have advised you of this, in Social Services Directorate, we've actually put more administrative staff in, because that makes best use of the resource that we have available to us, and it frees up social workers that we are crying out for in order that they can undertake the social work duties that only they can undertake. So I just think that's worth pointing out. And in relation to your question, I'm not sure how much more information we could give you other than what comes through Cabinet, because that's where all our decision making is generally undertaken. So all those papers you would see any discussions that we have, and you would also see any amendments that we have, or even to the fact that we'll ask officers to bring us different variations and papers. So I hope that assists.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Leader. I have had discussions with Caris about what further information that I feel we need to provide value to Cabinet going forward. It's been a very constructive process, and I know that will take to officers for engaging with me on that. And thank you for your comments and observations on the very difficult financial position which we find ourselves in. There are no easy easy cuts or savings to make to back office functions any longer, and inevitably that will mean frontline service cuts, and that should be underlined, as you very eloquently have done so. Are there any other members who would like to come in at this stage? I can see no indication. I'd just like to say welcome to the Mayor, who's joined us after his mayoral duties, and the Leader has also joined us in the chamber, but I know he's been observing throughout the meeting. We'll now move to the 4.1.2, and that's the Corporate Financial Overview. This encompasses BCBC budget reductions from 2010 to 2023, additional income, alternative delivery models, efficiency savings, or as Councillor Gebby rightly mentioned, cuts, or changes to service provision. So this is from pages 5 to 8 in your public document packs. So I invite members to indicate if they wish to speak. Okay, I will intervene then and ask a number of questions. With regards to national legislative commitments on page 6, I believe that it is essential that all national legislative commitments, whether that be to eradicate homelessness, respond to climate change, or legislative changes in social care, should be fully funded from central government rather than from our revenue support grant. Which national legislative commitments are not fully funded by the UK or Welsh governments above and beyond our revenue support grant? Perhaps Caris or a member of her team can intervene on that. It'd be interested to know what that amounts to in terms of the number of pounds, and and perhaps I can hear from the cabinet member, the leader or the deputy leader or cabinet members, on what representations they and the WLGA have made to central government, both in Wales and in the UK, in Westminster, to ensure that these commitments are fully funded in the future, so that it doesn't heap yet further pressure on already hard-pressed local authorities such as our own, who are having to deliver more services without the consequential funding. The Deputy Leader has indicated she'd like to respond, so I will bring in her first, followed by the Leader, and then the Chief Executive.
Thank you very much. I thought I'd give members an example of how we challenge Welsh Government and the consequentials that we receive. As you're all aware, care and support in Park Prison is delivered by us in conjunction with the Cwmtaf Health Board. We are funded as part of a consequential, but that consequential comes to Wales and goes to every council, irrespective of whether they have any secure estate or not. I've recently written to the Minister and asked them to review the way this funding consequential is delivered, because I'm aware that we're at over 50% of budget pressure in social care, just in Park Prison alone, is not funded by Welsh Government nor our consequential, so we do need to have some discussions in relation to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. I'll now bring in, with the Chief Executive's permission, the Leader, followed by Councillor Rees-Good, and then the Chief Executive.
Thank
Leader.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reassure colleagues that we take every opportunity through the Welsh Local Government Association, which is the collective voice for all 22 local authorities in Wales. We take every opportunity to make that case to Welsh Government, that any decisions that are made at a national level that result in additional responsibilities or burdens for local authorities are fully funded. In recent years, we have seen the success of that. So, for example, the implementation of universal free school meals for primary school children, we have had funding for that. We've had some additional funding for the additional responsibilities we have for young people with additional educational needs through the new legislation that's been introduced by the Senedd in Wales. One of the difficulties sometimes is that none of us will know the full impact of the legislation until it is enacted, and sometimes the full impact is not realised for a number of years, but we do continue to make that case. Sometimes there are examples like the example that the deputy leader has given that is quite specific to Bridgend, so it impacts particularly hard on Bridgend because we're one of the few local authorities in Wales with a prison, and actually of all the prisons in Wales, Park Prison has a population with a much higher percentage of older people and vulnerable people that will require that care and support, and that's not the case in secure estate across Wales. But we'll continue to make that case, Chair, at a national level, but also at a local level as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that reassurance, Leader. I'll now move to Councillor Eastgood.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, as the leaders pointed out, we are constantly in conversation with Welsh Government through WLGA and through our own offices. I mean, from a future generations and well-being point of view, this is one of those difficult pieces of legislation that is very future-gazing, and I think we have to welcome a lot of the work that Welsh Government does in terms of setting policy that is about that looking forward and looking to a brighter future that doesn't always have consequentials at the point that legislation is made, but is still a very valuable piece of legislation. Within my own brief as well, we also have homelessness and housing, and this is obviously a considerable challenge within all local authorities and across Wales at the moment. We have received, following considerable work with the Minister through the WLGA, an uplift of over £1 million in terms of our homelessness funding, as well as an uplift to put in place a strategic coordinator role within the borough to help us coordinate our homelessness population and to help us with the new Housing Act that's just come into force. So I think that should be welcomed. And what I would say is we do have a very good relationship with ministers and with the WLGA. So we are often finding ourselves in a position where we are getting that message through when we do require more funding. Beyond that, I would also note that I know the Cabinet Member for Education has also had a lot of conversations with his ministerial counterpart in the Senedd, and that they are looking at funding, expanding our Welsh medium education provision, as well as others. So where there are diktats, as it were, from the WG, I think we are often in a very good position to make sure that we do receive funding for it. But as the leader notes, we aren't always fully aware of the total cost of that policy. But we do work very hard to make sure that we get as much funding as we can. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor Good. I would just reiterate, no, I appreciate your reassurances on this, all of you as senior members and cabinet members. However, it has been the case in the past that national legislative commitments have been part of the revenue support grant in the initial years and then haven't followed in forthcoming years. And we must ensure that funding follows those legislative commitments throughout that process, so it doesn't heap further pressure on local authorities such as ourselves. But thank you very much indeed for those reassurances. Apologies for keeping you waiting, Mark. I'll now bring in Mark Shepherd, our Chief Executive.
No problem at all, Chair. Thank you very much. Actually, some of the points I was going to make have been made by both the leader and Councillor Good, but I just think probably just to emphasise, there are some elements of Welsh Government policy that are very obvious in terms of their parameters. So the leader gave the example I would give about universal free school meals, where it's quite easy to define what the extra burden might be and therefore what the extra cost might be, and therefore that is fully funded. I suppose the point that I would just raise for members' attention and just reiterate is that there are other parts of Welsh Government legislation and duty, so Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, Social Economic Duty, dare I say the 2030 expectations, all of those things are much more difficult up front, certainly, to understand what the consequences might be and to define. And I think that's sometimes where we can come unstuck, is that something can come in which is well-meaning, and I get that, and I support largely the direction of travel, But actually, as you move through and you implement that across the organisation, some unintended consequences and costs can emerge. And I think that dialogue, therefore, with the WLGA and the Welsh Government is really, really important, so that we are able to identify that as we go along. So I hope those examples just illustrate really the difference, I suppose, between a very specific piece of legislation, which is easy to cost and easy to understand, and other directions and strategies which are perhaps less obvious, if that's okay.
Many thanks, Mark. I would fully endorse your comments. We'll now move to Councillor Heidi Bennett, please. Unless Councillor Gebbie, that's a new hand?
It is a new hand.
A new hand. So I'll go to Councillor Jane Gebbie then. She would like to come back in. Before I come to you, Heidi, apologies.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was going to reference the grant funding that you referred to. For many years as trade unions, one of the things that we did as part of our campaigning for fair funding for local government was around the grant funding, because like the leader and Councillor Good have referenced, and indeed Mark, part of Welsh Government initiatives but used to come with grant funded. An example of this would be the winter funding pressures, because we've made representations for years that we shouldn't have grant funding. It should be part of the consequential, and therefore because it's easier to plan. However, one of the things that we've noticed this year is the winter funding pressures grant went straight into our consequential, and we've missed that terribly in social services. So it's better the devil you know sometimes rather than the devil that you don't, is what I would say. But grant funding is of particular interest to me, only because it doesn't help us in workforce planning going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Leader, and I would fully endorse that as well. Councillor Heidi Bennett, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Carys and the team for the comprehensive report. On page 7, bullet point 3, and as mentioned by the Chief Exec, the socio-economic duty, I wanted to know what work has been done to implement or to take forward this within the Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Who would like to respond? Mark Shepherd, please, Chief Exec.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Bennett. I mean, in a sense, it's actually about, for me, that duty is about the way we behave and the way we consider any decisions we make within Cabinet and Council, and a recognition of the impact rather than a specific piece of work per se. So I think it's really about the way we act, the way we behave, and the way we commission, contract, make decisions. So ultimately, there's an awful lot of work going on about a common understanding of that, because I think there's probably, and this might be the point you're making, there's probably more we could do to specifically steer and bend policy in that direction. But I don't think the expectation was that it would immediately be perfect everywhere. I think it's pretty common with a number of these long-term ambitions that we have to change the way we behave in our considerations when we make decisions. So I think it's probably incumbent upon all of us that is part of what we consider when we bring recommendations to Cabinet and Council in particular.
Thank you very much, Mark. Councillor Bennett, are you content?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think it links to the One Council approach of the culture of the organisation, and so that's quite helpful to understand. Thank you.
I'd like to reserve your comments.
Firstly, apologies for missing the pre-meeting. It was all down to the weather, so I hope I didn't miss anything in that. But my questions do start at page 9, but I find that I'm going back and forth in the report with some of the questions, because page 9 also refers to page 22 to tie it in. But also my first question on page 9 now ties into something that has been raised already by one of the Cabinet members. So...
Sure, I appreciate that this could happen. It's just to try and steer members into some kind of logical order, but perhaps you can come in at page 9 and then link it with the other comments within within the report, if that's possible.
Okay, no problem.
Councillor Griffiths, do you have any comments on pages 5 to 8?
It's a general comment about the financial strategy, so I think this is an appropriate time to ask that. Thank you, Chair. It's really about the growth of the need for social housing in the area and the challenges we put on that. I know a number of councils are looking at alternative ways of providing longer term housing, and I know that we are starting to struggle to get temporary accommodation through hotels, with a number of suppliers removing that accommodation on short notice. Is there something that we can do from a longer term capital investment point of view in terms of building our own housing capabilities that we could be able to then help us to alleviate the temporary housing requirements that we have? So it's really a question around capital investment in our own properties to alleviate social housing challenges. And maybe this is a question for a Rees Cabinet member.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Good, please.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I think looking at becoming a property owning authority again is definitely worth review. But I would say to the member, obviously we have a considerable pressure in housing at the moment, and that doesn't seem to be reducing. And I think we do have to come up with innovative solutions to that. But what I would say is that creating essentially a new directorate to manage what would essentially be a council-owned sort of temporary accommodation hotel, I don't think, when looked in the round, makes a tremendous amount of sense. It would cost a considerable amount of money to us. We'd have to employ a number of staff that we don't currently have, and have an expertise that we do not have in terms of providing accommodation directly, which is something we haven't done for many years, as the member will be aware. We do receive £10 million per year through the housing grant, which will increase over the next 3 years 400 units of social housing, and that's being used by our RSLs and provided by us to ensure that we are getting that strategic housing that we need. So I appreciate Councillor Griffiths' question, but my view would be that we need to continue to find solutions with our RSL partners and to build on the housing that we already have, rather than looking to invest in owning our own temporary accommodation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Good. Councillor Griffiths, are you content with the response?
Yeah. I'm just like I was really asking whether we had considered it. So I think that that answers the question that's being considered, and at the moment it's in abeyance. So I think it's something that we should keep an eye on in the longer term. But thank you, Councillor. That was very helpful.
Thank you very much, Councillor Griffiths, and I'm sure other members will have questions on our commitments and the Welsh Government's commitments regarding homeless prevention, our RSLs and empty properties later on in the meeting. Are there any other questions on pages 5 to 8? That's the corporate financial overview. If not, I'll ask the remainder of my questions, and that is with regards to additional income alternative delivery models and efficiency savings. At the bottom of page 6 of the packs, you say that you will look to increase and raise additional income. How do you propose to do this? As my understanding, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, Caris, is that as a local authority, we are limited to some extent in commercialising the organisation and making any kind of significant profit.
Yeah, I can come in on that, Chair. There's a number of ways that we can do it. We are reviewing, and I think it's in this report, the fees and charges that we plan to make for the coming financial year. That's against services that we already charge for. So that's part of the work that's ongoing as part of this budget setting process. You are right, there are some services where we are told how much that we can charge, so things like planning fees are outside of our control. There are others where there are external requirements on us. So for instance, within social care, there's a cap on the amount that we can actually charge people who receive some of our social care services, and that's been set by Welsh Government. So in some areas of our fees and charges, there are restrictions on what we are able to do. You are right in that we are not allowed to borrow money to build up like an investment portfolio, if you like, as you were suggesting there. So we are unable to borrow to do that. We do have some already within our asset portfolios that are in place and not affected by that. But certainly an issue for the council was, if it wanted to go down that route, not only would we not be able to borrow for it, they would stop us borrowing for many years to come if we made use of the money in that way. So that does significantly reduce now what local authorities are able to do in that way.
That's really useful clarification. Thank you, Caris. Councillor Griffiths, did you want to come in on this point, or is that a legacy hand?
Apologies, it was a legacy hand, Chair.
No problem at all. Thanks very much. Just a final question then on page 7, council tax and collection rates. At the top of page 7, you refer to council tax collection rates. Of course, you mentioned in your report and your verbal presentation at the beginning of the meeting that the budget proposed is predicated on a 6% increase in council tax. So I just want to know really how you feel this increase would affect the council tax collection rate. Now, during a cost of living crisis, you could possibly expect there to be some pushback from residents on such a hike, even though it is significantly below the current rate of inflation. And last year, of course, the report on the budget, and I quote, said, "In setting the revenue budget for the current year, the council agreed to a 0% council tax increase, and that the rationale for this was to support the citizens of Bridgend to deal with the rising cost of living, such as increased energy and food bills, other inflationary increases, mortgage interest rates, and national insurance increases." So I suppose my question is, what's changed? Was it, in retrospect, was it a mistake to freeze council tax last year? Because with the exception of high inflation, which the Bank of England, I understand, feel that will sharply fall in the next financial year, and of course the Ukrainian conflict, which we all hope will end with immediate effect, little has changed in terms of the rationale which you used to argue for a freeze in council tax last year. So I'd be interested to know from Cabinet members and I suppose Cabinet members, as this is a political decision, how they feel the rationale has changed. Leader, would you like to come in? No? Yeah. Yep, Leader.
So we've seen, the rationale is that we've seen a doubling in the rate of inflation, as you've indicated. That has had a significant impact on our costs. We didn't experience that level of inflation last year. We didn't anticipate that inflation would increase as much as it has done. And that obviously has had an impact on pay inflation, that we have to pay our staff. And it has an impact, and it's had a significant impact on energy costs. And again, energy costs for all our buildings. And we have to pay those energy costs, whether it's care homes, schools, or the highways depot. Those energy costs have increased significantly. So, and we've also, of course, experienced and continue to experience. We'd hoped last year that we would not see the increase in demand for all our services, and I think it's fair to describe demand across all our services continuing to rise and actually rising at a faster rate than they did last year. So social services, our pressure continues to increase. So that is a big difference to last year in terms of the inflation rate and the pressure on our services, unfortunately. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Leader. I think that's a justifiable rationale for the tax rate, which is predicated by this budget. However, perhaps Caris can come in on the less political point of collection rates, and that is, I understand every 1% of council tax is £870,000, or roughly Now, would an extra percentage point mean that the council tax collection rate fall, meaning it has very little effect? If you can grasp what I'm trying to say, just a hypothetical situation, would a 5% increase in council tax result in a larger council tax collection rate? And are you fearful that a 6% collection rate under the current cost of living crisis, where council tax is probably the second largest pressure on household bills after anyone's mortgage or rent, would that have a significant effect on the council tax collection rate, which has fallen in recent times as a result of the COVID pandemic? It would be interesting to hear your professional view.
Okay, thank you for that question. I mean, with regards to the collection rate, we do monitor that very closely. And you're absolutely right to say that the collection rate fell in the financial year 2020-21 due to the pandemic. However, we are seeing that collection rate now come back up. We're also seeing we are now able to collect arrears. So people are now paying their arrears as well. I think it's very difficult to be able to answer whether a 1% change in the predicted council tax would impact on those collection rates. The one thing I would say, though, is we do have support mechanisms in place to support people who are having difficulty in paying their council tax. So members will be aware there's a report going to council this afternoon in relation to the council tax relief scheme. And this helps people who are in financial difficulty, and we are able then to help them with payments of their tax, and depending on their particular position, they can get up to a 100% reduction in their council tax. We're doing a lot, and we have stepped up the amount that we do in relation to publicising that kind of a scheme to ensure that people know it's around for it if they feel that they need to, and we support them to do so. Having said that, our spend on that particular budget head this year is not at full budget, but that I would just reassure members that we do everything we can to signpost people to that level of support if we become aware of it, of a particular family in difficulty, or we do publicise it a lot. So I know that's not a direct answer to your question, but I think it is a reassurance that yes, our collection rates have gone up. I can't say directly what an impact on our collection rates will be of any increase or otherwise in the council tax, but we do have systems in place to help people who are struggling to pay their council tax.
That's useful clarification. Thank you, Caris. I know, the leader would like to come in. I know members are conscious of time for the meeting, so I'll bring in the leader and then we'll move on.
So just very quickly then, Chair, and over 12,000 of our residents receive that council tax reduction scheme support, and over 9,000 receive a full council tax reduction. So that is support that is targeted at those households and families on the lowest income in the county borough. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks for those observations, and that's useful, Leader. Thank you very much. We'll now move on then, unless anyone else has anything further to add to 4.1.3, and that's the budget narrative on education. I'm conscious of the fact that Scrutiny Committee 1 will be delving into this area in more detail tomorrow, but if anyone, any member of the Corporate Review and Scrutiny Committee has any comments, please raise your hand now, and I know Councillor Amanda Williams wanted to intervene. Amanda.
Thanks very much. Apologies. I'm hoping that my internet stays because it's been a bit dodgy with this weather. I've got a few questions on page 9. My first one was linked to what was discussed earlier about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. It's paragraph 4. The council has a longer term goal to make the overall school system more efficient, having the right number of school places available in the right parts. And so that's linked to also the wellbeing objectives that are throughout this report as well. And I've got some questions later on about that. but I've been in 3 consultations over the last week about the expansion of Coity Primary School. And that was a question that was asked by a member of the public, was about making sure you have the right number of places available for the future, which is what this is suggesting that we're looking to do. However, we were told by officers that because of the nature of the budget and the amount of money we've got to spend, we cannot build schools bigger than they're required at that moment in time, because obviously there's a cost to all of that. And so I worry that we're not achieving this. So this statement here that we're looking at making sure we've got the right number of places, because the consultation for Coity is a classic example that in 2027, we're saying it needs to be a 3-form entry. So that was my first question on that statement and how we can manage to do that, because I think it's a difficult task, because we do only have a finite pot of money, and it's a difficult task to bring in the well-being of future generations into some of these decisions, which are inevitably going to cost us more money than we actually have in the pot. So do you want me to stop there before I go? That's the next question.
Yes, if you don't mind, Councillor Williams, the Deputy Leader, Councillor Jane Gebby, would like to answer your question.
Thanks very much, Chair. Councillor Williams, it's not officers that determine that we can't build schools to that magnitude. We can only build to the capacity of children that we have, and that's Welsh Government diktat. So we can't actually spend any more money than the residents we actually have. And you may want to look at the population needs assessment. That will give you more indications in relation to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. But I do think we need to be cognizant that's not our officers. That's Welsh Government diktat.
I know, Councillor Williams, that this has been an issue also in Pencoed, whereby we've had to extend the school due to population increases, but Welsh Government legislation did not allow us to take that into account when actually building the new Pencoed Primary School, which was rather unfortunate and something which probably needs to change at a national level. But I think lobbying Jeremy Miles, the Minister, may be appropriate in that regard. But you can certainly come back on that if you wish to do so, or you can move on to your other points.
No, I won't come back onto that now, because I raised that through the consultation process, my concerns anyway. My next question was on page 9 again, and it was the 2% cut in the budget to schools. So I wanted to ask, first of all, how confident we are as an authority that it won't result in multiple redundancies in schools, because obviously with redundancies comes payouts, particularly as the more those members of staff who are longer serving members of staff, older members of staff, would more likely be wanting to take the redundancy, which would cost us as an authority more. And I also wanted to ask on there if that 2% budget is simply to the schools budget or the whole of the education budget. Because if you go on then to page 21, table 1, it says at the moment we've got a current overspend of 795,000 in education. So I'm concerned that we're going to achieve this, because if schools go into deficit, that money still has to be found. It's not just a figure on a piece of paper, it still has to be found. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. Of course, it's a difficult balance to strike, in that we are, of course, having to monitor the whole of the corporate-wide budgets, but I'm conscious of the fact that Scrutiny Committee 1, which occurs tomorrow, will discuss this in more detail. I know that the Corporate Director for Education, Lindsay Harvey, isn't present at this meeting, and he'll be able to answer questions in more detail. Of course, I'm not a cabinet member or a education officer, but my understanding was that it was from schools' delegated budgets only, rather than back office functions, and that redundancies would only occur at the last possible moment, and not at an early stage within any schools' delegated budget savings. But of course, I have many questions on education as well, which we can rehearse tomorrow. Perhaps in brief, Councillor Gebby, the Deputy Leader, can intervene and provide a corporate-wide overview of how the education savings will affect our budget, but obviously bearing in mind that this will be a matter for Scrutiny Committee 1 to look at in significant detail tomorrow morning.
Thank you very much, Chair. We do have Councillor Blundell in chambers, so I didn't know if he wanted to contribute at all. The only thing I would say is that we do not expect to make redundancies. As a HR policy, so this is the corporate bit that I think you need to be aware of. As a corporate policy, our ERVR, which is early redundancy or voluntary redundancy, is set up in such a way that we do not try to make any staff redundant. We'd actually try to redeploy them elsewhere in the authority unless they actually wish to leave. It's a very fair scheme. I don't think you'd expect me to sit here and defend that scheme, but actually I know many people that have had added value to their own lives, and it's their health and well-being that we need to be thinking about when we're talking about staff in schools and any redundancy that they have. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gebby. Councillor Blundell hasn't indicated, so are you content? Oh, Councillor Blundell's only observing the meeting. Apologies, he's being very diligent in observing the meeting, which he's not necessarily needs to be at. So congratulations to Councillor Blundell on that. He's very keen. He's very keen. You're very keen, and we'll see you tomorrow at the Scrutiny Committee 1 meeting to look at these issues in more detail. Councillor Williams, would you like to come back on that, bearing in mind, of course, that we do have Scrutiny Committee 1? I know it's a careful balance to strike.
No, it's fine, but it did need to be raised, obviously, because if you've got questions, the public would expect us to ask them in all meetings, and not every member is on education scrutiny. Fortunately, I am, so I can raise that tomorrow.
Of course, yeah, I fully appreciate that, and this is not designed to restrict members' questions in any way. It's just to ensure that we have an in-depth discussion on education tomorrow, and I was aware that you sit on that committee. Are there any other questions just on the budget narrative for education? There are legitimate questions to be asked on a corporate-wide basis on all different directorates, so I invite any member to come in on education. The only thing that I would mention with regards to the corporate-wide impact of a 2% nominal reduction in the total schools delegated budget is that in the report it mentions the future savings relating to schools delegated budgets, and I quote, may not be feasible. And elsewhere within the report, it lists the delivery risk of achieving this budget reduction as red or at high risk of not being delivered. So this is going to be a concern for our committee in particular as Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So perhaps I can ask the Cabinet members or even the Chief Officer for Finance, Performance and Change of how confident you are in able to balance the budget, given the fact that education presents such a significant proportion of our funding. How confident are you that schools' budgets are deliverable without more schools falling into significant deficit positions? And this is a concern for me and no doubt other members, as we are consistently told by the monitoring officer that we are legally obliged to set a balanced budget. Who would like to answer that?
No, you don't want to.
It's essentially a question based on the delivery risk of the budget setting process. 88% of the budget is categorised as red, which is a high delivery risk. So that is going to be a concern for members in setting a balanced budget. Only 4% is green and 8% are amber. So essentially that is the question. How are we confident as members that we are going to be setting a balanced budget during the 23-24 financial year? The leader is happy to intervene, so I'll call him now. Councillor Hugh David.
Thanks, Chair. I'm confident that we can and we will set a balanced budget that will deliver what we need. We've done that every year that we've set a budget. This authority, whoever is in administration, set a budget that will balance. Of course, there will be some savings, some cuts, some efficiency measures that we don't deliver on. That's always been the case, actually. Because sometimes we face difficulties in making those savings. But then, as you will know, the process is that we will identify in the course of the financial year additional savings to offset those savings that are not made, because sometimes the circumstances changed quite significantly during the year, and some of those savings that we anticipated that we could make a year ago are not. For example, this year, as you know, it's come to have not been able to realise the saving on the rental income for Tithixton Community Recycling Centre, but we will ultimately make it. It's a timing issue, but in that directorate we've had an offset in saving because we've been able to realise sooner greater savings on the switch to LED street lighting, for example. So that delivered bigger and earlier savings than we anticipated because we were able to move at greater progress. I'm going into some detail there because I think it's important to give an example of what we find every year, that of course we will try and make all the savings that we can, but sometimes there will be some difficulties in making those savings, but we will make sure that the budget balances this year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Leader. I think it was important to provide that clarity and to say that the budget is a fluid document and not the Holy Grail. So that's a useful intervention. Thank you. Leader,
and I should say that we haven't, and this is the purpose of and the value of these meetings. Of course, we haven't finalised the list of savings yet. We are mindful that some of those savings will be more difficult to make than others. And in actual fact, what we don't want to do is we don't want to put savings in, and we won't put savings in that we aren't confident that we can make during the year for a range of different reasons. So that is something that we will want to finalise when we finalise the budget, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Unless anyone else has anything further to add, we'll now move to page 10 and 11, 4.1.4 of the report, and that is social care and wellbeing. And I'll call Councillor Freya Bletson.
Thank you, Chair. Page 10, paragraph 2, we have written there the reason for the 21-22 underspend was a significant grant income received in 21-22, including one-off grants such as the Social Care Recovery Fund, 2.9 million, and the Social Care Pressures Grant, 2.2 million. My question there would be probably for Caris. Highly dependent on short-term funding grants. What is the funding position at the moment, the current funding position? And what happens if the funding is cut? Will that leave a significant hole in our budget? And what is our plan B if that does happen? I have got another question further along, but I'll come to that in a minute.
Thank you, Councillor Bledsoe. Caris, are you in a position to answer that?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for that question. I think Councillor Gebby has already referred this morning, hasn't she, to the number of grants that come in particular into social care and the problems that they cause for the services and for us in finance in planning forward for this. And I guess that's what your question is predicated on, really. We do have a lot of short-term grants in social care. I can't give you the total figure off the top of my head, but as a council, we have short-term funding grants coming in of over 70 million. So you can see how dependent we are on some of these grants. And to be fair to social care, although these have been grants, they have been coming into the service now for many years, and they are propping up key services again, as you've already said, Councillor Bledsoe. This is the first year where we're starting to see them drop off, and we are now looking at exactly what our exposure is towards that. And I know the services are working very hard to identify those areas which are under pressure as a result of this. You'll also see that yesterday we reported into Cabinet the Q3 financial position, and we reported in there that some of these grants that are no longer coming in are now impacting on our budget. So you will see that the social care element of that report certainly referred to that yesterday, in that these grants not coming in is now starting to impact on our budget position. The service has looked forward with regards to that, so I know that they are looking at how they deliver their services, but also some of the pressures that they've put in for spend for next year reflect the fact that there's an anticipation that some of those budgets or grants rather that we've had for years, we're not anticipating to get in the coming financial year. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Caris. Councillor Bledsoe?
It does, thank you. It's stark listening is that, but thank you very much, Caris.
Councillor Bledsoe, did you part of the report, or?
I did, if that's okay. So
yeah,
across the page, on page 11, Chair, sorry. Paragraph 2, bottom of the paragraph, it says a small number of providers are facing financial difficulties and there is a market exit probability in both adult and child services, which will place more pressures on council budgets, as the council will always be a safety net provider in such circumstances. Now, my question is, how are we going to be that safety net provider? I know that we've got a provision coming online in Bryn Menyn, and that's great news. But I also know that we have significant pressures from more complex cases, etc., coming into the council. And if our providers are going bust, which is what that is basically saying, and we will be the safety net, and we are under extreme pressures, how will that look? Could I just have a bit of meat on that bone, please? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bledsoe. I'll bring in the Deputy Leader now, Councillor Gebby.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for the question, Councillor Bledsoe. I would just like to reassure you that Council have a statutory duty to deliver all the care and support that is required, whether that's through a commission provision or whether that's through ourselves and our own team. It is something we are considering at the minute. We do need to rebalance the market somewhat, but that will be a paper coming forward in the near future.
Thank you. Councillor Bledsoe, you content?
Sorry, just to clarify, I know we have a statutory duty to cover this. My question is, how will we be covering it? Thank you.
Councillor Gebby?
Yeah, that's fine. As I'm sure all members are aware, we are not fulfilling some of our statutory duty in relation to care and support, whether that be at children's or adults' social services. That's not a Bridgend focus, that is a Wales-wide focus. There are specific pieces of work going on across Wales to try and address the recruitment and retention of not only our social care but our health workers who work in the health board, and also our social workers. So it's a wider question. We do deliver it. So we've been in the position where we have had a market provision go bust, hand over the contract the next morning. I'm sure you'll be aware we have this quite regularly with school contracts, home to school transport contracts. At the minute, we are the ones responsible, and we endeavour to deliver at every opportunity and as early and as quickly as we can.
Thank you, Councillor Gebby. Councillor Bledsoe, you content?
Thank you, Chair. I don't think there's an answer specifically coming through on how we're going to do that, but I'm content to leave that for the time being. Thank you.
Perhaps you can pick it up in more detail at Scrutiny Committee 2, but I'm conscious the leader would like to come in with some observations.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I suppose just to give an example in social services, and that is in terms of the domiciliary care market. So we have over 12 providers on the domiciliary care market. We did have a provider that exited the market last year. We were able to successfully transfer those packages of care to other providers within the market. And then to give another example of residential care, when T Camogu, which was at the time an independent provider, was facing difficulties, was previously one of our homes, we stepped in. It is now once again an in-house service. So we will take action to support providers, and we'll also take action if any providers fail or if they want to hand packages back. And we have effectively, whilst minimising the impact on the residents and the service users, but it is a risk, isn't it, Deputy Leader? And we're working on a daily basis to try and reduce that risk, and when it arises, respond to it appropriately. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Bledsoe or any other members, would you like to intervene?
Thank you. I'm content with that response as well from the leader. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. From my perspective, of course, I don't speak on behalf of the whole committee, but I believe that the pressure on both adult and children's social services, that there is no option than to protect and enhance financial support for this directorate. But of course, inevitably, this will have ramifications for other directorates within our local authority, which will have to face additional burden, as we've seen from the proposal to cut school delegated budgets by 2%. Perhaps, unless any other member would like to intervene, I can refer to some of the other comments within this section of the report, and that's relating to some of the areas which sits within the Chief Executive's Directorate, and that's regarding homelessness prevention, which is listed as a budget pressure, and you've allocated £700,000 in the 23-24 budget to accommodate the additional legislation which is required to eradicate homelessness. One question I have is, do you feel that this is sufficient given the challenges in this area? Given the fact that the budget for example, rapid rehousing services alone rose from £60,000 in 2021-22 to £398,000 in 22-23, a significant uplift in the budget pressure in this area. And then finally, to build on Councillor Simon Griffiths' point regarding housing, you refer to the fact that the council does not have any housing stock of its own, but retains a number of statutory functions. What are you continuing to do to ensure that our RSLs get some of their empty properties or voids fit for purpose and usable by those priority residents who require support? Thanks very much. Councillor Good, please.
Thank you for the question, Chair. I think in terms of the RSLs and the housing position, as the Chair will know, we work very hard to ensure that our partners are pushing to get houses back from voids and into use. we will be speaking about this further, I think, in full council later today, where we have one of our major RSLs, Valleys to Coast, speaking to us. The the funding they receive and have received match funding from BCBC to get voids back into place. They are doing well on that. There is more that we can do, and I would say that all members have a responsibility to push on that door to make sure that they are following up that work. But I think, you know, we are dependent on seeing information from residents on what is happening on the ground, because I think it is quite easy for us to get the wrong impression sometimes. So I think, you know, there is lots of work we can do through SRS, for example, and through the housing team to ensure that our RSLs are clearing the voids where possible. I think we're all aware, though, that a lot of the stock is of a significant age and does require a lot of work. They are in a process, for example, of replacing kitchens and other important aspects of homes which require renewal every 10 to 15 years, which is proving, I think, a struggle in terms of the cost of replacing kitchens, which has obviously increased as manufacturing costs and materials have increased with inflation. So, you know, I think there is a lot we can do to work with our RSLs to ensure they are receiving the funds and support they need to get voids back in place, and we can.
Thank you. That's really useful response to the second part of my question. Perhaps can I ask Chief Executive Mark Shepherd to come in on my first point, which was regarding homelessness prevention, which is a major pressure for us within the Chief Executive's Directorate. You've listed £700,000 as a potential budget pressure. Do you feel that allocation is sufficient, given the fact that we've seen a major uplift from £60,000 to £398,000 in recent years? And how have you come to that figure, Mark? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think it's fair to say that the position with homelessness is very volatile, and I don't think I could say with certainty that I could predict exactly what the position will be throughout the year. So we've made what we believe to be a reasonable estimate based on current figures. The other thing I'd say is we continue, and perhaps unexpectedly sometimes, to get further funding from Welsh Government. So as recently as this week, I think, we received notification from Welsh Government of additional funding in view of their commitment to the duty. So I think it's our best estimate. I think it's a valid question, Chair, that clearly there are various things that are changing rapidly, not least, for example, the additional burden from refugees and Ukrainians, as well as our own local people. I think we currently got 430 people in temporary accommodation, which is an awful lot of people. So I don't think, I hope I'm not in any way giving the impression that this is easy. It absolutely isn't. And we may well have to revisit our relationship with Welsh Government and ask for further funding if we can't meet the burden in the way we said. But I think it's a reasonable estimate for where we are at the moment. It's a recognition that the burden is increasing and the duty is increasing. But I do come back to what I said at the outset. It's volatile, and you know, I think it's something we're going to have to look at very carefully, and I'm sure Scrutiny will as well as we move through the year to help us monitor that.
Thanks very much, Mark, for that honest appraisal. Unless anyone else has anything on social services, please indicate now if you do. We'll move on to the public realm and communities, which is section 4.1.5 of your reports, pages 12 to 13. Please do indicate if you would like to speak on this budget narrative. Of course, this will be discussed in detail. Oh, there we are. Councillor Penhale-Thomas would like to intervene.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, just relating to this narrative, obviously, these are services that people see and hear, and they're services, generally speaking, that most members will get either complaints about, concerns about, queries about. So obviously, you know, the public realm is very much as what it says on the tin, the public realm. Referring lower down in the pack to one of the potential savings here is around the waste enforcement team, which covers this area of work in the council. Not really points that have been discussed in other forums, but I am genuinely concerned, and I know other members will share these concerns around this. Throughout COVID, I think there was an uplift in fly tipping, both as a result of members of the public being out and about in the area, and also waste and recycling services being reduced, certainly community recycling anyway. Hand in hand with this, there's obviously a proposal to potentially take one day off the community recycling centres as well, and potentially, I'm guessing, a rise in the fees that the local authority via Kia will charge residents, potentially, of course, for collection of items at the roadside. Those three things added together, I think, are a recipe for potentially, I'll be polite, uncleanliness on our streets and in our beauty spots. And I really think we will reap some really poor consequences if this is to go ahead. I am really concerned about it. And I would think that members would also agree that the cleanliness of the county borough has been a significant issue over the past 12 months. I've never had, as a local member, more complaints about the state of what the county looks like. And I think this would just make it that much worse. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Pennhill-Thomas. Who would like to take that? Mark, please, Chief Executive.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in, Chair. And if I'm frank, I don't disagree broadly with what Councillor Pennhill-Thomas has said. And I suppose that may well be, on the basis of what he said, it may well be the feedback we get from the budget consultation and indeed from Scrutiny as part of your recommendations. I suppose the challenge, and you outlined this at the very beginning, Chair, the challenge is seeking to get that balance, isn't it, between levels of council tax, levels of savings, levels of growth, and trying to strike that in a way that resonates with most people. And I think this will be an area where I think, inevitably we will perhaps get responses which will be similar to Councillor Pennhill-Thomas's. We can therefore review perhaps whether we do need to cut to the extent that's been indicated there. But I always make the point, Chair, that will simply mean that something else somewhere else will emerge as the alternative. But I don't disagree with the general point. I think it's something that's very visible. Public feel strongly about, and if that comes through strongly in terms of the budget consultation and through scrutiny, then clearly we'd have to relook at that.
Thanks, Mark. And it's something which I suppose the public associate with their council tax. So it's a very careful balance to be struck. We always find that the Communities Directorate have been cut to the bone. But of course, if we're going to protect children's and adult social services, which are under significant pressure, then inevitably we are going to have to look at cutting services in other directorates. But thank you very much for your response. Councillor Pennhill-Thomas, you content, or would you like to come back?
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Chair. I think the Chief Exec knows that I don't live in cloud cuckoo land. In fairness, I absolutely understand that if we're not cutting so deeply here, where else do the savings come from? But just a point I wanted to raise as a local member. Thanks.
Yeah, my stake is certainly not cloud cuckoo land, Councillor Pennhill-Thomas. We'll move to Councillor Amanda Williams.
Thanks very much. Mine had exactly the same questions as Councillor Pennhill-Thomas. I had the same issues, but tagged on the back of that question, it's probably going to be, you'll say, for the community's scrutiny meeting, but I'm not on that committee, so I just wondered if it can't be answered today, if it could be moved across, because I can see Councillor Paul Davis, the chair, is in this meeting. It's on page 21 then, the table of where we are, and it says there's an underspend in communities. And I wondered if we're saying that we're doing all of these cuts, and like we've all said, communities is what everyone sees about the general cleanliness of the area, what are these underspends relating to, just so the public get an understanding of that when we're saying we're going to be cutting these services. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. Yeah, I'm sure these issues will be discussed in detail by Scrutiny Committee 3, but it's worth asking. So I'll bring in the Chief Executive, Mark Shepherd, now.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Williams. Again, a very fair question, but you'll notice in the regular reports about the ongoing revenue position in year, one of the biggest difficulties we face are workforce issues across the organisation, but there are some specific areas within communities where we're frankly unable to recruit. Now creates a saving, but it's, if you like, an undesirable saving, because it clearly impacts on our capacity to deliver services to the level that the public and you as elected members would want. So I think I haven't got all of the detail in front of me, but my recollection is that predominantly the underspend is to do with vacancies and the fact that in certain parts of the services in communities, so for example, corporate landlord, engineering and others, we've been unable to recruit to posts. Now, moving forward, and you may not want to get into this now, Chair, I appreciate, but that whole workforce risk, I think, is a generic issue that's coming across in all directorates, and of course it does impact on our ability, as I say, to deliver services to the level that that you might expect. So that would be the predominant reason, but there, if you like, it's an undesirable underspend, if that makes sense, in the sense we would far rather have the people in place to deliver better services.
Thanks, Mark. Are you content, Councillor Williams?
Yes, thank you.
I have a resources and organisational development and other council-wide services later on in the report, so I'll reserve my comments until then. We've got now the Chair of Scrutiny Committee 3, which predominantly considers communities, Councillor Paul Davis.
Chair, I'm not going to take up too much time for this meeting because obviously we're going to look at this in some depth on Monday. I'll give other members a good chance. I'm listening intently here. Just like to say, Chair, that I've got a family member, a very close family member who works for waste enforcement, which has been brought up just recently by Councillor Thomas, Penhill Thomas. I just think to declare an interest in that. I can't have any discussions around that topic at all because it's literally a very, very close member works in that section. Okay, so I just like to make that point.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Davis. That has been recorded, and I'll ensure that the scrutiny officer records that in the minutes. Thank you very much for clarifying.
Thank you.
Okay, do any members have any other comments on the public realm? Okay, therefore we will move to supporting the economy, 4.1.6. Please raise your hand if you have any comments. Okay, I haven't, for a change. So we'll move to regulatory and corporate services, pages 14 to 15, 4.1.7 in your packs. Regulatory services, registrars and benefits. Please do raise your hand if you have any comments. No, we're rattling through this now. Pages 15 to 17, other council-wide services, 4.1.8. Right, sorry to disappoint you, but I have a number of comments on these. First of all, we refer in the report to collaborating with other local authorities on a range of different services. We already do this, of course, with shared regulatory services and internal audit. Can you outline what other opportunities you're looking for further collaboration in the delivery of council-wide services? And furthermore, I'm sure I could speak for many members when we say we witness on a regular basis the organisation operating within different silos. So how can we ensure that there's organisational change to ensure joined up working between different directorates and that we genuinely achieve a one council approach in practice rather than it simply being a catchphrase or an ambition? The leader wants to take this one. I'm not sure if he wants to, if he's going to anyway.
I'm going to. I'll answer the first question or point that you made, and that was about a collaboration. So one area of new collaboration is the Cardiff City Deal Joint Committee. So we now have a statutory requirement. We have to be part of a corporate joint committee, and we're part of the corporate joint committee for South East Wales, and as part of that we have to develop legally now strategic planning and strategic transport functions at a regional level. So that's an example of where we will make further progress on collaboration. And you've highlighted, Chair, a very successful example of collaboration, the shared regulatory service with the Vale of Glamorgan and Cardiff that delivers on our environmental health trading standards and other important functions. And of course, we have Central South Consortium as well. Another important, very important area for us that's at a very early stage of development, and I referenced this at the last full council meeting, is that we are exploring with Cwm Taf Morgannwg University Health Board the potential for greater collaboration in adult services, particularly in services for older people. As you will know, we are one of the leading authorities in Wales, currently with the joint integrated teams that we have for intermediate care. So we have joint integrated teams with health on the district nurses and occupational therapists. We are looking to build on that success, aren't we, Deputy Leader, in the future? But that is at an early stage, and obviously we will bring more information back to members on that specific proposal. Thanks, Chair.
Great, thank you, Leader. That's really useful. I'll bring in now the Chief Executive, Mark Shepherd.
Just a general comment on what the Leader just said, because I think he outlined a number of specific areas. I think the challenge for me is always ensuring that there is definitely added value in progressive collaboration a number of years ago, and then often people found, well, yes, you can join services together, but actually there might be some undesirable effects of there not being savings and actually taking them further away from localism, if you like. So I just think we need to set the parameters correctly when we look at collaboration, but we are open to collaboration, not just with other local authorities, but, for example, you may get to this later, Chair, but, we are looking, for example, at shared office space with other public organisations such as South Wales Police. So there's a whole range of collaborations that can carry on. More generally, your point about one council, I think, is a very interesting one, and as you might expect, one that is put to me regularly. My personal view is perhaps sometimes we need to better define what one council means. I think you said it can just become a catchphrase. I mean, for me, it's always been about what is inevitably a very large and diverse organisation with 800 services having common purpose, if you like, common goal. What it can't mean, and I think this does something it doesn't mean, is sometimes, that while you're out collecting the bins, while you're there, why don't you cut the grass? And while you're there, why don't you teach the kids in the local school as well? I mean, there's an inevitability that we run a lot of different services and they will be separate to some degree. But I do take the broad point that sometimes there's certainly the case that we're not as joined up as we should be, and certainly there's sometimes a perception that we're not as joined up as we should be, and there should be greater emphasis in terms of ensuring that that is worked on as part of our new corporate plan, as part of our major objectives, to ensure that it's perhaps more obvious that we are a single organisation with a single goal or a single set of objectives. So I do take that point. I'm not in any way denial about that, but I do think the definition is also interesting, because some of the examples I get given of not being one council, I would say, well, that's not really going to work in the way that you describe, because we have to recognise we are an extremely large organisation with over 6,000 employees, an enormous number of services, and many of them are defined in the way they're delivered, and it's not always possible to do some of the things that people ask for as well, certainly in terms of data sharing and that sort of thing. So as long as that's understood, I do take the point entirely.
Thank you, Mark. That's a very reassuring answer. Your comments link in very nicely to my next point regarding property and building maintenance, and that's regarding our commercial property portfolio. Income and divert this into the delivery of services. For example, I know you've identified wings of Ravenscourt, which is listed and resulting in savings of £120,000, but it's amber in terms of delivery. So I'd be interested to hear why it is amber. But can you outline what other assets you are considering for disposal and when you feel that income will be realised? Mark, please.
Yeah, certainly, Chair. The reason it's AMPA is more to do with timescales and delivery. Obviously, the new financial year starts in a few months' time. I think a couple of things I'd say. First of all, I think we're ahead of many authorities in terms of our rationalisation of estate, because we'd already, over recent years, closed the Sunnyside offices and demolished them, and we'd also disposed of the Sunnyside House offices where IT were based. So we've already, that rationalisation process is well underway. The issue with the Ravenscourt saving, the reason, as I say, it's AMBER, is that we haven't yet completed a full winter of our new service delivery model. And I think we wanted assurance that come peak winter, which I suppose we're now in, and with the issue of energy bills, that there wouldn't be a much greater demand for larger numbers of staff to return to the office. That hasn't been evident, and I think therefore we're more confident now moving forward that the arrangements we put in place around hybrid working will work well. And that allows us, therefore, to now begin to market the wings at Ravenscourt, but also potentially to share space within civic offices, which was my point earlier around South Wales Police. So that will progress. It may well be that we have sufficient interest from public service partners at the moment to fill those wings, but if that isn't the case, and there's various meetings ongoing, if that isn't the case, then we will be looking at commercial marketing. But again, just trying to ensure that what we don't do is diminish or compromise any of our own services in shared spaces as well. So we just need to do that carefully. But the AMBER is really about timescales and how quickly we could move to a position of having people occupying those spaces. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. If any other members have any comments to make, please do indicate. But in the meantime, I'll move on to legal services, if I may, and refer to comments which the Deputy Leader made earlier on, and I can't stress how much I support them, and that's with regards to legal services. It is absolutely essential in support of main service delivery areas, but particularly the delivery of improvements in children's social care, that I would like to emphasise how important it is to invest in this area, given that the service is already very lean. We are very slim on, for example, paralegals in the legal service area, which are essential in delivering improvements in children's social services. This is just an observation rather than a question, but I hope it is considered as part of the budget setting process to ensure that this service area is protected and enhanced. Unless anyone wants to make any comment on that, I'll move to my comments on finance. With regards to the finance section, Caris, you say you will be looking to further improve in this area. Have we lost anybody? Mark, I think we've lost Caris or Councillor Williams, so perhaps
I was going to say
you're taking everything today. You're doing
I wasn't anticipating. I wasn't anticipating taking this one, so you may not have the best answer from me, but I think there's a recognition, and it probably builds on your first point as well. So I'm also fully cognizant of the need that the back office services, if you like, such as HR, such as legal, such as finance, there's a tendency, isn't there, to be quite dismissive and therefore think that we can make savings from it. But I think actually, genuinely, if you had any of the other corporate directors here now, they would tell you that actually the pressures in HR, the pressures in legal and the pressures in finance are actually impacting on their services. So I just firstly to reiterate the point you make. However, because of that, and if I link the two things together, perhaps one of the challenges for us is to understand whether our processes can be improved and there are ways of creating efficiencies in some of those back office processes to support those frontline services. Now, that's not simple after 10 years of austerity, because I'd like to think we've done the obvious things. So if you look back at MTFS savings, you'd see significant savings in areas, for example, such as corporate landlord, HR, maybe too many, maybe we've cut too much. But I think what we are committed to is, if you like, what used to be called sort of a lean processing, but essentially a review of how we do things, the number of layers that we do it. Inevitably, Chair, part of that is potentially digital. It's about whether there is perhaps a robotic part to that as well, and whether there's other things that may help improve our systems. And when I say that, I'm immediately conscious that people will think about job losses. That's not what I'm saying. I think there's plenty of things for people to do, but it's whether we can make the simple, repetitive processes done in a different way. And we're looking at whether we might need some expert outside help to do some of those reviews. But I think that's the commitment, really, Chair, that's being made there, is that if, as we anticipate, there's continued to be huge pressure on our frontline services, then we need to look very, very closely to give you the reassurance that we're doing everything as efficiently as we can in the back office. Now, some of that will be changed, because I know it creates a reaction when I talk about digital as well. But if it's done in the right way, in the right places, it can genuinely create better services and efficiencies for the organisation as well. So I think if Caris had been here, that's what she would have said, but more eloquently than I had. So something along those lines, Chair.
Oh, that was a good effort, Mark. Well done. But Deb Exton now is here, Deputy Head of Finance, to perhaps put some meat on the bone. Welcome, Deb, and thanks for all your work on the budget and the MTFS.
Hi, thanks, Chair. No problem. Caris actually is back now, but I think she lost a connection for a short period of time. But I'm happy to just add on to what Mark said, if that's okay with you, Chair. Okay, so for the recording, I'm Deborah Exton, Deputy Head of Finance. So in terms of finance, we're obviously very reliant, like most services are, on the IT systems that we use, and we process in different areas a large number of transactions. And I think we've seen this over the last couple of years, as you know, in terms of the number of new grants that we've had to process, the cost of living, the winter fuel. And it's obviously challenged us in terms of what systems and processes we use to do that, and how we can better improve and make those systems more robust, more efficient, and obviously speed up the processes. So we've got the main systems that we use. So for example, for revenues and benefits, we have one system. But obviously, as we've gone over recent years, obviously the systems have developed, and we've looked at introducing new modules which will automate a lot of the processes. Now, some of that work got given new grants to administer, basically to try and connect up all the different elements of the systems more efficiently, so we're not duplicating any processes, so things happen automatically. We got a better interface with the customer, so we're looking at some of those. I mean, in terms of the general financial systems, the statements of accounts, as you know, especially if you're on governance and audit committee, they're getting more complicated. There's an awful lot of information in there, and it's trying to bring information together from a lot of different systems, so we can cut out the manual intervention, but not because it's, as you say, a staff saving opportunity. It's really so staff can then be used to do the more strategic work, because there's still an awful lot of strategic work and coming in. What we're finding is we don't need the automation, we don't need the processing, the transactional work so much anymore. We just need to look at the more strategic work and that large number of grants coming in. So it's that kind of thing that we're looking at going forward. So I hope that helps to answer that question for you, Chair.
That does, Deb. Thank you so much for that eloquent description of what you're planning on doing in terms of financial process improvement. We will now take Human Resources and Organisational Development, ICT and Procurement, Democratic Services and Internal Audit, after which we will take a 10-minute break. So with regards to Human Resources and Organisational Development, we know that HR is one of the biggest corporate risks, as Mark has mentioned, and this is one which relates to our workforce, recruitment and retention, well-being and sickness levels. However, while we run a high vacancy rate in some key positions, this inevitably saves the local authorities some money in not having to pay them. So how are you looking to strike a balance to ensure that key positions are filled, to ensure that we have a high level of service delivery, while managing workforce levels in offering voluntary redundancies where applicable. Furthermore, in some areas, our existing staff are becoming exhausted in some areas, and I'm concerned that sickness levels could increase due to work we're approaching these two workforce issues. Kelly, please. Kelly Watson, our monitoring officer. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. For the purpose of the recording, I'm Kelly Watson, Chief Officer, Legal, Regulatory and HR. So just to pick up a couple of those points, as you said, it is a massive corporate risk at the moment, recruitment and retention. What we find in, I'm sure you're all aware of the particular issues in social services and wellbeing, but there are issues throughout the authority. I think we've already mentioned today corporate landlord, in legal, so there's numerous problems across the authority. We are looking at a number of methods. So we look into advertise differently at the moment, and we're looking at various options we can do that. In particular, social media advertising, because that's the new way to do it at the moment. So instead of advertising in newspapers, we're going to go for more social media. Obviously, there will be some professions where they have their dedicated journals, and we'll continue to advertise in those where it's appropriate. We're looking at other methods. So last year, the market supplement policy was approved. I've accepted one market supplement application, and I know there's a few more in the pipeline through the authority, which will come through, and they will be determined on their own merits, because obviously they can't just be processed, because that could lead to job evaluation problems down the line. As you said, it is a balance in not filling them, because it can be a cost saving. But what we find is in key areas, and in particular, you know, I can talk about legal because it's under my remit, where we haven't been able to recruit to roles there, we've had to take on agency workers. And as you can imagine, that has doubled the cost that we are paying. So it is a balance to be struck, and where possible, we'd always want to recruit permanently, because the alternative is extortionate costs. If I can just pick up on your other point, wellbeing, members will probably be aware we appointed on a 2-year fixed term contract a wellbeing officer. Managed to find some funding, and we're going to extend that contract, so that wellbeing officer will be staying with us for the next period. We're also looking at, we run HR surgeries where managers can come for support and guidance if they need to, and hopefully that will mean that will filter down to their teams then, who'll get that additional support and guidance where appropriate.
That's great, Kelly. Thank you so much for those reassurances. Turning to ICT now, and you say that you've embarked upon a digital transformation programme, but it notes that the ICT print strategy is listed as amber in the delivery and will deliver £40,000 worth of savings. Can you outline why this cost saving can't be brought forward to the forthcoming financial year, and why there is a delivery risk associated with it? Martin Morgans, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the print strategy, obviously we haven't got as many officers in the office actually printing, so it's a detrimental setup in terms of the click charges. So the requirement to print actually offsets the cost of the actual printers themselves. So we're in an unusual situation. So those costs are there, have to be borne in terms of management. Once the management's end, that gives us the ability to make that saving. So I highly endorse, mind you, printing less, which is far bit more environmentally friendly, and using digital means.
Great, thanks for that clarity, Martin. Finally, from me, procurement. With regards to procurement, you say that there's a corporate procurement strategy. I guess this is a yes or no answer. Is it fully aligned with the Council's decarbonisation agenda and net zero 2030 strategy, as there's no mention of net zero in this brief section of the report? Kelly, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Procurement have been heavily involved with the development of the net zero strategy. Our corporate procurement strategy was developed prior to that, but they do align with each other. And a lot of the projects and initiatives we're involved with in procurement are linked to not only the net zero strategy, but also the social partnership strategies and developing locally where possible, which obviously will then impact on our carbon emissions.
Thanks very much, Kelly. Are there any other comments on other council-wide services, for example, internal audit or democratic services? Therefore, unless any other members would like to intervene, I will now be calling a short comfort break until midday. Thanks very much.